Remember, whatever you resist persists, right? When we suppress our emotions, we're resisting those emotions. They don't just disappear. You just end up with a backlog of things you got to process when you finally decide to. Hello, hi, I'm Rajni. This is the Simply Rajni channel. I am a wellness and life coach offering tips to hopefully elevate your emotional and general wellness. So recently I was supporting somebody who's been going through grief, very intense grief. She lost her husband suddenly. And I wanted to talk about how people process grief differently. A lot of cultures, and my culture, I'm from the Indian culture, a lot of Asian cultures also, they emphasize being strong and they associate strong with suppression. If you can suppress your emotions and not emote, you are strong. You have strength. And I just want to call out that that is a blatant lie, okay? I have seen this up close in my own culture. I have observed several family members. I have also, in my previous career, have dealt with a lot of grief, health, and healing. I have seen my own grief up close and personal, and I do not believe that suppression is the way to go with grief. And I'll tell you why. First of all, there are different ways that people grieve. There are external processors of, I'll say process emotions specifically, external processors, and then internal processors of emotion. And specifically, we're going to talk about the heavier emotions. I don't want to say that they're bad or good. They're just heavier. They feel heavier in the body. They feel like, oh, I want to get away from them. And that's why we label them as negative. But that's a judgment of the mind. Everybody goes through emotions. Even the people who we quote unquote call, enlightened, they also have emotions. They're not robots, right? We're human beings. We have emotions. And so what does that mean? So when somebody's externally processing, that means that they're showing their emotions. They might be crying, they might be yelling, they might be, showing in some way what the emotion is. They're wearing it on their sleeve, as we say. Other people might be processing internally and maybe more quieter when they do it. It might be more subtle. And they might be the people who are journaling. They might be the people who are maybe talking about it with maybe one friend, but even they're kind of asking a question. There's a lot of contemplation. This is not the same thing as suppression. This is not the same thing as suppression. Sometimes people say, processing internally is suppression. No. Suppression is when you decide not to look at it. You have decided that that's, or some part of your mind, maybe subconsciously you've decided that's scary, or that's not allowed, or emotions aren't good. Emotions are scary. I don't want to look hysterical. There's a whole history around that word, right? Hyster is the Latin root for uterus. Somebody who's hysterical often meant a woman who's showing her emotions boldly, strongly, strong emotions, right? So the idea that showing your emotions is a weakness has been ingrained into culture for a long time. And you'll see this even with men, right? Boys don't cry, men can't emote, otherwise they'll be weak. We've associated emoting with weakness, emoting with hysteria, emoting with, things that a trait you don't want. At the same time, the thing that we want is connection. The thing that we want is for people to really feel each other. And that comes through being an emotional being. Human beings are emotional beings. So emotions are energy in motion, right? Emotion. And they're just energy that needs to be felt and moved through. However you process, internally or externally, nobody should shame you for that. And I want you to take a stand for yourself. If you're somebody who's doesn't have the language around this is why I'm doing this video. You can tell somebody, you know what? I appreciate that maybe you don't express your emotions in this way, but I am an external processor. I talk about my feelings, I cry, and I show them in a healthy way. I'm not saying you need to go punch somebody out here. No, I'm not condoning any kind of violence. But even in formal therapy, I've heard of people saying, take a pillow and punch it and get that emotion of frustration or anger out. Again, it's all about how you're doing it. I'm not a therapist. I'm not recommending any kind of therapy. This is not medical advice. But this is about telling yourself that it is okay for you to have big emotions. It is okay for your emotions to be intense sometimes and for you to feel them. A lot of times people who've been taught to suppress, they're people who have big emotions and maybe they're external processors. And then how do they suppress? They use numbing. And we have many forms of numbing: unconscious sex, drinking, drugs, shopping, maybe even, food. So we have all sorts of ways that we don't want to feel our emotions. But those emotions, when we actually feel them, they last, a couple of minutes. If we're really present with those emotions of sadness, of grief, they last for a few minutes. Grief, the process of grief, it comes in waves. If anybody out there is having grief right now, and I know especially around the holidays, it can bring up a lot of grief. Some people have lost their loved ones, and this time of year creates loneliness, brings back memories. You're not alone. A lot of people are going through this, and it's just about having a skill, learning how to deal with these emotions. It's about sitting with them, figuring out what your best way is to process. For me, it is journaling at times, but sometimes it's putting on a sad song and just letting myself release those tears. One of my favorite ones that I've used to help me with when people that I've loved have passed on is there's a song by Josh Groban, You Raise Me Up. You Raise Me Up. And man, the lyrics, the music, it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful song. So, there are different ways to deal with your emotions, and do not let anybody shame you. Don't let them shame you. Don't let, somebody I know was getting called names and labels for being an external processor, or making other people feel uncomfortable. You're allowed to have your emotions. And yes, if people in your life, they're not comfortable, find safe spaces to do it, right? I sometimes would come home from work and just have my own space, make myself a cup of tea, and I knew I was going to process some heavier emotions. I didn't do it on the subway. I didn't do it at work, because it's not, everybody isn't allowed to see my vulnerability. It's only the people that I choose. And so remembering that also is a key thing. Some people cannot handle big emotions because they can't handle their own emotions. And there's nothing wrong with you. We all process differently. And if you need this today, I just want to tell you, you have permission to process how you process, as long as it's not hurting yourself or anybody else. I think we have to give ourselves that permission to be human in life. And remember, whatever you resist persists, right? When we suppress our emotions, we're resisting those emotions. They don't just disappear. You just end up with a backlog of things you got to process when you finally decide to. And a lot of people come to me at their breaking point. They come to me as a coach when they've just had enough, and they're like, I got to deal with this. And I call sit in the swamp together, and we process. It's not therapy. We process through different techniques. And at the same time, I'm helping them, and they're also doing the heavy lifting of building their life to where they want to go now. But that backlog has to be cleared. It's heavy baggage when you're building your next level, right? We can't hang on to the lower rung of the ladder and then expect to leap to the top. You gotta let it go. You gotta let that arm come up and keep moving up the ladder. I hope that was helpful. And if you're going through grief, be gentle with yourself. There's not a particular timeline. You have your own timeline. And trust that you will get through it. You will see life as beautiful again. It does happen, even in the thickest of grief. I have been through it, and I just want to assure you that it is possible. I hope that you have a wonderful evening and wonderful day wherever you are. And namaste. Take care.